Hey guys, I hope everyone's having a good time. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, happy whatever the fuck you're celebrating, and welcome back to my channel. Now today, it's gonna be the Christmas special of the Floydios. We're gonna be talking about my Genesis albums ranked from worst to best. Their whole discography, by the way. And I was thinking, let's switch it up a bit. Lately, I've been making a lot of album reviews, and it's Christmas time now, and during this time of year, I'm always like listening to Genesis. It just comes with the season. It just fits so well. Their music is just so atmospheric and so, expansive, and it just suits the whole winter atmosphere. And I thought, what the hell? Let's just make a ranking video. I love watching these kind of videos on YouTube. I love seeing different people's perspectives. And a lot of times when I'd watch these rankings and a band would like place an album that, I didn't think much of, like very high on the list, it would actually make me go back, listen to that album, and gain a whole different appreciation for it, like pick up on things I was missing, and I really appreciate that. So that's why I think these videos are really important to make, and it's really important to get your opinion across, and let people know that, hey, listen to this album, like there's more to it that meets the eye, and that's basically the reason I'm making this video. And yeah, basically any excuse to talk about Genesis is a good one. I mean, come on, one of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time, probably my favorite, right up there with Yes, Vandergraaf Generator, King Crimson. There's so many. King Crimson, Jethro Tull. Those are just the popular ones, but there's so many amazing progressive rock bands. And I thought, let's just start off with Genesis. Hopefully in the future, I'll be making a lot more of these kind of videos because, I don't know, it's really fun. And basically what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be ranking basically my top 15 Genesis albums. So all the studio albums they recorded, not including live albums, not including EPs like the Spot the Pigeon and 3x3, because to be honest, like, what's the point? Like, I'm not too familiar with them. They're not that great, so I didn't think it would be worth including them here. And this goes without saying, but this is just my personal opinion. So I'm not ranking the albums based on like their sales or their like impact on the music industry or their creativity. I'm just ranking them based on my personal preference. Like which ones I enjoy going back to the most, which ones just do it for me. And with Genesis, there are so many albums, especially when you start getting into like their mid to late 70s period, that are just so similar in quality. I had such a hard time like subjectively ranking them. So what I did was I created this rating system. And not to bore you guys with the details, but basically what I fucking did, it's the nerdiest thing ever, was I looked at each Genesis song and I gave it a score out of 5 on 6 categories. And those categories were vocals, lyrics, instrumentation, creativity, replayability, and an overall score. And each of these 6 categories had a different weight. So for example, lyrics, I gave a weight of 10% of the score, and instrumentation I gave 30%. Because I consider the instrumentals to be more important than like the actual lyrics of the song. Like I've heard many songs with like shitty lyrics that I still love because the instrumentation's amazing. So I gave each category a different weighting. So then I would basically get the song's overall score, and then what I would do is I would weigh that score based on like the amount of time that the song occupies. So let's say a song is like 20% of an album in terms of like length. Then I would multiply that score by 0.2 to get like a weighted score, and then I would add all those to get like the overall album score. So I know I'm crazy. Like I had a lot of time on my hands because I'm on Christmas break right now, so why the fuck not? And yeah, I came up with this list. So that's going to be reflected with the numbers I'm going to be spitting out here because a lot of them are really close. I mean, some of these albums are like off by a few decimal points, to be honest. So yeah, the point I'm trying to make is if your favorite album is like in the middle of the list or even like near the bottom, that doesn't mean I don't like the album. It's just, they're all so good. Something's got to be at the bottom. So, enough disclaimer bullshit. Let's get right in. And this isn't going to be like an exhaustive review of each album. I do have many Genesis reviews on my channel, so if you want to watch some in-depth, epic length reviews, then it's there for you to watch. But this is just going to be like a brief rundown of my top 15 Genesis albums. So here we go. Okay, let's see some other people's opinions. Hey, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
What's your favorite Genesis album of all time?
I don't know.
Come on, give me something.
No, I don't know. I don't know the names.
Holy fuck.
You're asking the wrong
Look at this bathtub.
Oh my god, you have to video.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have filmed. We have plumbing problems. Okay, come on, pick a favorite Genesis album.
I don't know, Rock. You don't know the names.
Come on! Fuck! I'm just kidding. I love you. Okay, let's see someone else. Going around my house. It's a random bedroom in my basement. Grace!
What?
You're on video. You're on my YouTube channel. What's your favorite Genesis album of all time?
What are the options?
Okay, from Genesis to Revelation, Trespass, Nursery Crime, Foxtrot, Selling England by the Pound, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering, and then there were 3, Duke, Abacab, Genesis, Invisible Touch, We Can't Dance, and Calling All Stations. Go.
Selling England.
Good choice. Okay, let's see. Let's go upstairs. Who else is around? Okay. Got to get other people's opinions. What's the best Genesis album of all time?
Oh, Genesis? I'd say not Selling England. What's the other one? You remember?
Foxtrot, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Selling England.
The Lamb.
All right. So there we have it. A lot of differing opinions on what the best Genesis album is. All right, guys, kicking it off with number 15. And guys, number 15 and 14, I didn't even bother, using that rating system I came up with because I already knew these ones were going to fall at the bottom. They're by far the worst Genesis albums, and they're pretty much the only Genesis albums that I don't listen to on a regular basis, just because. And you know what the thing is? They're not even like terrible albums. They're just so like middle of the road that Genesis, being the band they are, they've just done so much. They could do so much better than this. But number 15 here is going to be their debut, From Genesis to Revelation. And this album here, I'll give them a pass. It was their first album. They were heavily dictated by their producer Jonathan King to making like a Bee Gees kind of rip-off, kind of pop folk kind of album. Of course, you got like the religious concept, which was way too ambitious for the band at the time. They were just basically just out of high school or just finishing high school, I think. So we'll give them a pass. But yeah, From Genesis to Revelation, I tried, guys. I just can't get into this one. It's just so boring. There's really nothing interesting about this album whatsoever. I mean, at the beginning, you have a few good tracks. Like In the Beginning's pretty good. The Serpent, I believe, is a pretty cool song. The Wilderness, a few tracks at the beginning are pretty cool, but overall it's just so boring, and the music itself is just doesn't really do it for me. It just doesn't have that Genesis flair, and but Peter Gabriel does sound very good, so I will give it that. His voice was pretty decent on the album, but overall it's just boring. They got the whole string arrangements coming in, just sounds totally out of place for what Genesis would become, and that's reflected because when they re-released their Peter Gabriel albums and remastered them, they just didn't bother remastering this album. So, that says it all. Like, the band just literally discarded this album at the wayside. And at this point, it's not even really considered a true Genesis album. Like, the band even considers Trespass, their second album, to really be their true debut. And I agree with that 100%. So, yeah, that's From Genesis to Revelation, 1969, I believe. And, yeah. By far the worst Genesis album. Alright, guys, coming in at number 14, we got Calling All Stations. That's right, guys. We're following up their first album with their last album. And this album here, it's one of my least listened to Genesis albums. But it's not a bad album. Like, this album definitely isn't shit. It's just, nowhere near as good as the other Genesis albums. Again, like, the only original remaining members are Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford. And, after Phil Collins left the band in 93 or 94, I think everyone just assumed the band was going to basically disband, call it a day, because there you go, your lead singer, your drummer, just out of the band. But no, what do? They decided to keep writing material. and Tony Banks thought it was good, and he's like, let's just put this under the Genesis name. So they auditioned a few singers, and they ended up with Ray Wilson from the band Stiltskin, which is kind of like a grungy band from the '90s. Don't know much about them, to be honest, but yeah. So they brought him in, and they recorded this album. Now, this album here, it does have a lot of great tracks. The title track, it's really moody, really heavy for Genesis. I love that track. The Dividing Line, great 8-minute epic, Uncertain Weather. Those 3 songs are fantastic. And I think if the band continued with this lineup and they developed their sound and they made a few more albums with songs of that caliber, this might have been like a late career renaissance of Genesis. Those songs are great. But unfortunately, the rest of the album is kind of boring, uninspired. Tony Banks' keyboard sound just doesn't really sit right with me. It's way too synthy. There's really none of that like classical flair that, he would show off on the earlier albums. And yeah, overall, the album's just way too long. It's about 68 minutes long, and it suffers from the same problem as We Can't Dance, which we'll get into later. But basically, it's just a lot of the songs are uninteresting. It's just way too long, way too boring. But Ray Wilson, he's a great vocalist. And Nick DiVirgilio on drums does a great job as well. So I can't complain about that. And those 3 songs really hold the album up. But otherwise, it's just a so-so album. Again, I didn't really use my rating system. I knew this was going to be number 14. So yeah, that's calling all stations. But still give it a listen. It's not as bad as people say it is. Coming in at number 13, we got an album that grew on me a lot over the years. 1992's We Can't Dance, the last album with Phil Collins. And this one here, you know what? It suffers from one major problem. It's just too damn long. It's about like 68, 67 minutes. And, this is just reflective of the 90s at the time. The CDs were coming out. CDs were out in the mid '80s, and bands were just deciding to like throw on like all the material they had. Whereas before with LPs, they would have to pick and choose the cream of the crop to fit like the 45 to 50-minute runtime. And yeah, I guess Genesis fell into that trap, and they just put too much on the album. So there's a little bit too much filler. But where this album shines, it really does shine. I mean, I honestly think this album here, if it was a single album with just the best tracks, and maybe they threw in a few more quality tracks, it would have been even better than Invisible Touch. But nonetheless, they didn't do that, and we get a lot of filler. So that's the only problem. But there's some absolute classics on this album. Driving the Last Spike, a 10-minute epic about building the railroads. Fantastic. Fading Lights, just a great, like, retrospective, introspective kind of song. You got amazing pop tunes like Jesus, He Knows Me. Touching tracks like No Son of Mine. Dreaming While You Sleep brings a progressive edge into the album. It's a really good album. But there's too much, like, there's too many ballads and kind of like stuff that reminds me too much of Phil Collins' solo career. That, you could tell that it was mostly a Phil Collins written song with like minor contributions from the rest of the band. So, overall it's a mixed bag. But when it does shine, it really does. And, this late in their career, they're still putting out 10-minute long epics. They're still putting out some awesome instrumental passages. So, We Can't Dance, it's a good album. Just not one of my favorites. And this one here, I gave a score of, let's just check it out here, 74.55%. So, pretty good. A 74, it's a pretty good score in my books. But yeah, there's albums with significantly better scores. So let's move on to number 12. Okay, guys, coming at number 12, we got the self-titled 1983 Genesis album, or Shapes, or whatever you want to call it. It's the self-titled. And this album, this surprised me a bit, guys, because, I've always considered myself a pretty big fan of the album, and I still am. But over the years, I feel like I've been listening to this album a bit less and less compared to the other, like, pop era Genesis albums. And I honestly think it's because of side 2 of the album. And not that side 2 was a bad side. It has a lot of great tracks, like It's Gonna Get Better being my favorite. Just a Job to Do is a pretty awesome upbeat track. But I do think it has a little bit of filler tunes, some songs that go on a bit too long, like Silver Rainbow. And again, they're still enjoyable tracks, but, kind of feel like, maybe a little bit of filler is going on here. and things like Illegal Alien. Sure, it's funny the first few times, but it doesn't really have that replayability factor. So I find myself going to this album less and less. Now, don't get me wrong, side one of this album is hands down an 80s pop rock masterpiece. You got Mama, That's All, and then Home by the Sea parts 1 and 2. How can you go wrong with that? Some of the best 80s pop material of all time. And I could say this with no doubt in my mind, that if side 2 had the same quality as side 1 of this album, this would hands down be the best post-Duke Genesis album. It's just flawless pop instrumentation, so catchy, great hooks. Bringing in the progressive rock again with Home by the Sea Part 2. It doesn't get any more progressive than that. So, fuck you fans that say like they abandoned progressive rock. That's total bullshit. But yeah, side 1 is just perfect. And again, you gotta love that intro with Mama opening up the album. Just extremely, extremely dark, extremely atmospheric, and one of the greatest Phil Collins vocal performances. So side 1, I got nothing but praise for that side. Side 2 is where it gets a little bit wonky for me. And again, it's not bad, but just compared to side 1, there's no comparison, and I'm sure we all agree. But yeah, so the Genesis self-titled album, I gave it a score of 76.73% based on my rating system. And the top track was Mama. That was my favorite track on the album. And then the second best was Home by the Sea, Part 1 and Part 2. Kind of combine those. And number 3 was It's Gonna Get Better. I'm a really big fan of that track. Really cool. So yeah, moving right on to I believe we're on number 11 now. Coming in at number 11, guys, we got Invisible Touch, just narrowly beating number 12 with Genesis. These albums are off by about 1.3% or 1.4%. It was a really close call, but Invisible Touch came on top. And what can I say about Invisible Touch? It was their biggest album, their commercial breakthrough. A lot of the hardcore progressive rock Genesis fans hate the album. And I never understood that. It's a great album, and it has so many progressive rock elements on it. There's like a 5-minute instrumental closing out the album, like a synth weird experimental thing called the Brazilian. I'm not a huge fan, but then again, you could tell they threw caution to the wind. There's a 10-minute epic called Domino. Awesome track, really good track. One of the best later career Genesis songs. And of course, you got all the pop hits like the title track, Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, which is my personal favorite of the poppier tracks on the album. Great riff, great melodies. And Tonight, which again, there's a 3-minute version, which I'm sure most of us know. That's the version they play on the radio. But the one appearing here on the album is 8 minutes. And it does have a lengthy, atmospheric, weird keyboard and percussion instrumental section, which again is pretty progressive if you ask me. So I think Invisible Touch is a great balance and a great mix between 80s pop, really good quality 80s pop, and a lot of their progressive elements that have always been there since the Peter Gabriel years. So great album. The only thing I can fault it for, it has a few ballads I'm not too big on. In Too Deep's pretty good, but then Throwing It All Away is kind of, it doesn't really do it for me anymore. I kind of got bored of that song. And Anything She Does is kind of irritating. Other than that, from top to bottom, it's a pretty great album. And I enjoy listening to it. I listen to it quite frequently. And my rating system spit out a score of 78.26%. So again, very close to Genesis, which was 76.73. So yeah, really like a point and a half away from it. The top track from this album, got to give it to Domino, but Land of Confusion was a close second. And my least favorite was the Brazilian. I appreciate what they were trying to do, but I think it's too repetitive. It doesn't really do much for me. And that's pretty much all I got to say about that. And now we're getting into the top 10. All right, guys, kick it off the top 10. This might be a bit of a surprise for you guys. I'm going to put Abacab at number 10. And this album here, I've always liked this album. Don't get me wrong. But I've always liked Genesis and Invisible Touch a lot better than this album. But, over the years, it just keeps growing and growing on you. And I really appreciate this album. It's extremely creative. They went all like synth pop kind of, they went in a totally different direction after Duke. But I really think they kept their artistic integrity intact, because a lot of these songs are just extremely experimental. It seems like they just threw caution to the wind. They didn't give a fuck anymore, and they just wanted to just to do what they wanted at this point. And I really respect that, and it really keeps up with the spirit of Genesis. And there's a lot of just fantastic tunes on this album. You got Abacab, the title track. That extended fade out is just phenomenal. I love that. The guitar playing on it, although it's kind of in the background, it's infectious. Like, if you listen to it enough, it just seeps into your subconscious. Then you got No Reply at All. I mean, they bring in a horn section into the band. The Earth, Wind, and Fire horn section. We've never seen that before on a Genesis song. Okay, Me and Sarah Jane, not huge on that song, but it is pretty cool for what it is. Keep It Dark. Just this hypnotic, repetitive riff, like breathing throughout the entire song. Incredible. And then you got Dodo Lurker, another epic tune. Really weird lyrics. And it has that Genesis charm. It has that quirky atmosphere. You get the idea. It's a great album. I think a lot of fans, they couldn't come to terms with the new direction of the band. And then, of course, you got a few songs on side 2 that are a little bit underwhelming. Like Another Record, I was never really a fan of that song. That's always been my least favorite on the album. But Man on the Corner is a pretty cool kind of ballad tune. And same with Like It or Not. I've always liked those 2 tracks. The one song, it stands out like a sore thumb. Who Done It? This track, I'd be surprised if anyone enjoys this track. It's just horrible. It's by far the worst Genesis song of all time. And at this point, I usually skip it when I listen to the album. When I play it out loud, when I put it on the speaker, I keep it on just to annoy people. But overall, it's a pretty crappy track.
I like it.
My sister actually likes it, but she has no taste in music. No, I'm just kidding. But it's a very bad track. So anyway, best track on the album, I think I'm gonna have to give it to Dodo Lurker or Abacab, the title track. They're kind of neck and neck. Worst, I already said, was Who Done It. But some really close seconds were Keep It Dark and No Reply at All. I really like those ones as well. So without further ado, let's move on to... Oh, I forgot to give the score of this album. 80.23%. So we're cracking into the 80s now, which is actually pretty good. A low 80 on my rating system is actually well above average, so good album. And now we're moving on to number 9. Coming in at number 9, we're getting into kind of like the middle of the road here, guys. And Then There Were Three from 1978. I fucking love this album, guys. I've always liked it. I always thought this album was just incredibly underrated. And if you watch my videos, you know that, I hate using the word underrated because, again, music is subjective. But I feel that this album here, everyone looks at it as, a major step down in quality from Wind and Wuthering and Trick of the Tail. Because Steve Hackett, their long-running, innovative, amazing guitar player, one of my favorite guitar players, he left the band prior to them writing and recording it. And a lot of fans kind of see that as a turning point in Genesis, where they became a lot more commercial, a lot more accessible to fans. And I gotta strongly disagree. I mean, this album still has so many progressive rock elements to it. Really, it only has the song Follow You, Follow Me, which is probably the most commercial track on the album. Really the only very commercial sounding song on the album. And again, it's a really good song. And it sure as hell beats Your Own Special Way from from Wind and Wuthering, which was attempting to be a commercial song but failed. It didn't crack the charts. It was way too long. We'll talk about that later. And Then There Were Three is a great album. A lot of songs. There's 11 or 12 songs on the album, and they all have that fantasy kind of feel to it. A lot of them are pretty heavy, like the Down and Out, the intro song of the album. Really heavy track for Genesis. Has those heavy hitting drums, like Phil Collins going into John Bonham mode for a second there. And they got beautiful tracks like Undertow. Oh my god, guys. Undertow is one of the most underappreciated Genesis songs of all time. That just tugs at my heartstrings every single time. One of the best choruses. One of the catchiest. Burning Rope. Really showing that Mike Rutherford could, step up to the plate. There's a fantastic solo at the end of the song. Really emotional. Deep in the Motherlode, just catchy as fuck. Great rhythm to that one. Many Too Many, awesome ballad. The Lady Lies has some really intricate musicianship going on. The lyrics are a bit cheesy, with the Tony Banks synth. He has his cheesy synths and cheesy lyrics kind of pervading throughout the whole album. But The Lady Lies is a pretty cool track. although it is the epitome of the cheese on the album. Same with Scenes from a Night's Dream. All Right, Say It's All Right, Joe. Freaking love that track. One of the most emotional build-ups. So, then again, here you have an album. It's very strong from top to bottom. Really close to Abacab. Before, I would have said I like this album way better than Abacab. Now it's kind of like closing the gap because Abacab has kind of grown in stature for me over the years. So the scores aren't going to be very different at all. This one's an 80.4. And I think Abacab, what was it again? 80.2. So we're off by a 0.2 here. So consider them equal. But I love And Then There Were Three. Favorite track off the album. It's gotta be Undertow. That song there just, really tugs at my heartstrings. Then probably Down and Out or Burning Rope, things like that. They're all great tracks. Say It's All Right, Joe, very underappreciated. But yeah, I love And Then There Were Three. That's number 9. Coming in at number 8, guys, an incredible album. I can't believe this is only number 8, but Wind and Wuthering. I fucking love this album, guys. I'll never forget the first time I heard it. I was sick that day. I stayed home from school back like 10 years ago, and I was getting into Genesis at the time, and I discovered this album, and it was the perfect atmosphere. This is the perfect album to listen to in the winter. It just has this very cold and expansive feel to it, and honestly, some of the greatest Genesis tracks are on this album. One for the Vine, one of their best epic tunes from the Phil Collins era of the band. Blood on the Rooftops is one of my all-time favorite Genesis songs. Not just Phil Collins era, but in general. It's easily like a top 10 or top 15 Genesis track. And just a testament to how amazing Steve Hackett was with that classical intro. And, the vocals by Collins on this song, they kill me every single time. They absolutely kill me. So many great tracks. Same goes for Afterglow. I mean, there's some vocal climaxes on that song that are just incredible. I mean, check out my review. I go in depth with it. 11th Earl of Mar, great opener. That's a song I used to love a lot more than I do now. I still do love it a lot. But back in the day, I was like, oh my god, 11th Earl of Mar is a masterpiece. But now, there's a few things that kind of irritate me. Mostly the lyrics. But musically speaking, it's flawless. It's one of the flawless Genesis tracks. So I'm giving this album amazing praise. So I bet you're wondering, like, why is it only at number 8? Well, first of all, because all the other Genesis albums are stone cold masterpieces. And number 2, because there are like 2 songs on the album that I just don't really get enjoyment from anymore. The first being What Gorilla. There's just something about it. It's just irritating. I don't know. It's a weird instrumental. And Your Own Special Way, although it's pretty good, I love the verses. The chorus it's just too repetitive, and coming in at 6.5 minutes or something like that, it's just not fun to listen to on a regular basis. Also, oh man, what's it called? All in a Mouse's Night. Fantastic outro and Steve Hackett guitar solo, but for the most part, the song is just pretty middle of the road Genesis. So here we have an album with like the highest highs you could possibly reach, and also some of the lowest lows up to that point in Genesis's career. So overall, the album still got an amazing score, 86.5%. So yeah, significant jump up from And Then There Were Three, which was at 80.4%. But yeah, I definitely consider this album a masterpiece. I don't know if I mentioned it, but In That Quiet Earth, one of the best Genesis instrumentals, gets so intense at the end, just flawless. And yeah, that's Wind and Wuthering. Fantastic. The second album after Peter Gabriel left, and an album that really, really respected and loved by a lot of the fans. Seems that a lot of fans like this better than Trick of the Tail. I disagree, but it's definitely up there. Right, guys, coming in at number 7, 1980s Duke. This album here, guys, holy shit. Definitely the album that grew on me the most from all the Genesis albums. I mean, when I first heard it, I didn't immediately love it. And then throughout the years, it grew on me until at a point about like 4 or 5 years ago, I considered it one of the greatest Genesis albums. And I still do. But since then, it has fallen like maybe 1 or 2 spots away from where it was a few years ago. I think I used to have it at number 5. And it's not that I like the album any less than I used to. It's just other albums kind of increased in stature for me. But yeah, Duke is just, wow, guys, such an emotional album. The lyrics on this album are just heart-wrenching. Phil Collins' vocal performance overall was the best we've heard him up to this point. He really comes into his own as a lead singer on the album and as a front man, especially because he was doing the whole like solo career thing at the time, and it must have really boosted his confidence. But yeah, really touching album, going through a lot of themes of like divorce and like family struggles and things. So really realistic themes in contrast to a lot of the other Genesis albums, which dealt with a lot of like fantasy and whimsical kind of elements to it. This one here is pretty realistic, and it's just such a consistent album. I mean, top to bottom, there is not one song that really stands out as being weak whatsoever. I mean, every song is just incredibly strong, and it's a 55-minute album. So for an album to be that consistent throughout is just incredible. It's a masterpiece. It's a work of art. So many fantastic songs. I mean, what do we got here? Behind the Lines, just one of the most energetic openers of all time. Duchess, moody, it's powerful, it's emotional. Same goes for guide vocal. And then you got some hit songs like Turn It On Again, Misunderstanding. Please Don't Ask. It's a sappy, kind of like a sappy ballad kind of thing, but I really love it. Really has like the emotion going on. And then ending off the album, we got basically a 10-minute masterpiece instrumental track, Duke's Travels and Duke's End. Honestly, as a progressive rock fan, you couldn't ask for more. Which is why this album kind of baffles me, because a lot of progressive rock fans seem to dislike this album. And like I understand that like they're not like singing about fantasy lyrics or your standard progressive rock elements, but it's just a great album. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. Sure, some of the songs are a bit stripped back, like Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again. There's nothing really like complex going on with the musicianship, but it's just so great. The songwriting is freaking incredible. And, you got to appreciate that. I mean, it's not all about, like, long, extended solos and, shit like that. And bands got to progress. And at this point, they're already 11 years into their career. Like, they're not just going to keep repeating Selling England by the Pound over and over again. Like, that's not going to happen. But I love Duke for what it is. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. I gave it an 88.4%. So very high on my rating scheme. Anything above an 85 is a masterpiece. Best song, it's tough. But I'd probably either say Duke's Travels. You can't beat that instrumentation. Duchess is high up there as well, Behind the Lines. Hethes. I love Hethes. I think that's one of the best songs on the album, extremely underrated. And then, of course, I do love Turn It On Again and Misunderstanding, like the hit kind of tracks. They're all great. Least favorite would probably be Alone Tonight. It's a little bit sappy for me, but other than that, incredible album. Right, guys, coming in at number 6. This is an album that might also come as a surprise. Trespass from 1970. They're not their official debut album, but pretty much regarded as their debut album at this point. No one really counts from Genesis to Revelation, which I totally agree with. But yeah, we have Trespass here. And this album here, very early on in the band's history, Phil Collins hadn't joined yet, Steve Hackett hadn't joined yet. Instead, we have Anthony Phillips on guitar, and he does an incredible job on this album, bringing in all like the pastoral elements, a lot of the folk-inspired elements into it. And on drums, we had, I think, John Mayhew, who, nothing against the guy, but his drum performance is just, it's not very interesting on the album. It does its job. That's pretty much all I got to say. But what I love about this album is the atmosphere. I mean, it has this pastoral, medieval kind of feel to it, and a lot of really awesome folky tunes on the album. Like, for example, Visions of Angels, very, has those religious undertones to it, very classically inspired, awesome chorus. I think you got the epic Stagnation. I freaking love this song. I used to think of it as kind of like a boring Genesis track, but I wish I can go back in time and kill myself when I used to think that, because right now, I consider this one of the greatest Genesis songs of all time. It just takes you on such a ride, such a journey, and then there's this incredible build-up at the end, and again, Gabriel's performance is incredible, disturbing lyrics, fucking powerhouse track. Of course, speaking of powerhouses, we got The Knife closing out the album. One of the heaviest Genesis songs. I mean, there's points where, I swear to God, it sounds like Black Sabbath. Anthony Phillips is cranking up the electric guitars, hardcore riffs, amazing solos. And of course, you got the organ in the background just driving the entire song. Really strong early Genesis classic. I mean, this is top 15 material right here. And then, of course, you got other tracks like White Mountain. classic. The opener, Looking for Someone, very progressive song. And then you got Dusk, which is a nice little ballad. Probably my least favorite track on the album. But overall, top to bottom, incredibly strong. I think I like this album a lot better than most fans. Putting it above Duke and Wind and Wuthering and, things like that. But I truly love this album. It has a unique atmosphere. No other Genesis album sounds like it. And I really love Anthony Phillips and Mike Rutherford's acoustic guitar playing on it. It's just beautiful. So yeah, Trespass, very strong score, 88.5%. And I believe that Duke, what did I give Duke again? 88.4%. So again, here we go. If I didn't have this rating system, I would have never been able to decide between these albums because they're off by like literally a decimal point. Best song, it's hard. I want to say The Knife, but Stagnation is right up there. I mean, just following the tail of The Knife. And then, of course, Looking for Someone would be my number 3. Number 4, probably White Mountain, then Visions of Angels, and then finally Dusk. I thought I'd just rank them because there's only 6 songs on the album, so might as well. But yeah, that's number 6. Now moving into the top 5. All right, guys, coming at number 5, a fan favorite. This album seems to be well loved by a lot of fans. Trick of the Tail from 1976. The first of 2 albums from 76. I should have mentioned that Wind and Wuthering was also from 76, just later on in the year. And yeah, what can you say about this album? It's incredible. It was the first album after Peter Gabriel left the band, and it totally reassured fans that they can continue, with Phil Collins being promoted to lead vocalist as well as maintaining his drumming duties. It felt like, promoting from within was probably the best choice at that time to keep the fans in check. And at this point, the band was still 100% progressive rock. I mean, there was no signs of them being commercial at this point. And a lot of fans were on board. A lot of fans were happy with the replacement. And they continued and made a powerhouse album, Trick of the Tail. This album here, what's there to say about it? It's a lot lighter in tone, and it's a lot lighter in tone than The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is just a brooding, dark, heavy, disturbing album. This one was like a breath of fresh air. And a lot of fans really enjoyed it. There's a lot of complex instrumentation on there. A lot of Phil Collins bringing in his jazz fusion elements, which he really did well on Selling England by the Pound, but didn't really have a chance to shine with that on... oh, no, he did. He did. I was going to say he didn't really do much of that on The Lamb. But no, there's a lot of points. But on this album, he brings a lot of that back into the band. And the lyrics are a lot worse because, again, you don't have Peter Gabriel, and that guy was just a madman with the lyrics. So here you got a lot more Tony Banks lyrics, which are a little bit more childlike and a little bit more fantasy inspired. So in the lyrics department, the album is kind of lacking, but instrumentally it's incredible. There's a lot of like slow tempo songs on the album, like for example Entangled and Madman Moon, but they're Madman Moon. I always fuck up the title, but they're never boring and they're always hypnotic, especially Entangled. The ending of Entangled, one of the greatest moments in Genesis history with that Mellotron coming in. It's just one of the greatest, one of the most hypnotic and one of the greatest moments in Genesis history, honestly. You got Los Endos, the bombastic instrumental, Ripples, my favorite track on the album. Just a beautiful song with one of Steve Hackett's best guitar solos and one of like the best instrumental mid-sections in Genesis's career. Then, of course, you got Dance on a Volcano, one of the best openers ever. I mean, what can you say about Dance on a Volcano? It's just universally regarded as one of the best Genesis songs. High energy, high stakes. Then you got Squonk, one of the heavier Genesis songs. Some great drumming by Phil Collins. Really bringing in that John Bonham kind of style into the track. And a great catchy chorus and rhythm. Incredible. And yeah, there's a lot of amazing songs on the album. So the band proved that without Peter Gabriel, they were still functioning at 100%. They lost a little bit of the charm with the lyrics, in my opinion, but musically speaking, they were just as strong as ever. This album here gets an 88.52%, and what was fucking... Trespass was 88.5... Wait, what the hell? Oh my god, they might be tied, actually. I should have looked at this a little more carefully. Wait, okay, Trespass is 88.51%. Okay, good thing I kept the decimal points. And this one is 88.52%. So it is off from Trespass by 0.01 fucking percent. That's incredible. I didn't realize that until now. So that just goes to show just how closely I love these albums. So it could change any day, but right now, Trick of the Tail is sitting at number 5. All right, guys, coming in at the end of the list, we're already on number 4. These next 4 albums, there was a lot of competition. A lot of competition from like the Phil Collins era. We got fantastic albums like Trick of the Tail, Duke, Wind and Wuthering. I hope I made it perfectly clear that I'm a huge Phil Collins era Genesis fan. I love all those albums. But at the end of the day, you can't beat the Peter Gabriel era. I mean, and not just simply because Peter Gabriel was in the band, just because at this time, this just so happened to be Genesis's creative peak. And the 4 albums they put out between 71 and 74, just, you can't beat it. They're just simply masterpieces. So, my least favorite of that bunch, but a masterpiece nonetheless, is the album Nursery Crime from 1971. The first album with Collins on drums, Hackett on guitar, just an incredibly innovative album. I mean, the band just totally broke out of their shell with this one. We got the quirky Peter Gabriel lyrics. We got some fantastic, up-tempo guitar playing from Steve Hackett, whereas on Trespass it was more acoustic, more pastoral. On this album we have some incredibly thunderous guitar playing. I mean, listen to the musical box. Listen to those fucking solos. The Fountain of Salmacis, just incredible. And Tony Banks' keyboard playing is just off the charts on this album, bringing in the Mellotron. Just the intensity of the band just spikes up. And of course we get that Victorian English atmosphere, the classic cover artwork by Paul Whitehead. It's just such a classic album. I mean, the musical box, probably the second, or, it could arguably be the greatest Genesis song of all time. Just, hands down a masterpiece. Return of the Giant Hogweed, just bold, bombastic, one of the greatest instrumental sections near the end of the song. Just absolutely apocalyptic. And then the third epic on the album, Fountain of Salmacis, is just one of the greatest, most spine-tingling intros, followed by some of the least conventional song structures from Genesis's early career. So, fantastic. And then you got amazing songs in between, like the ballad for Absent Friends, Seven Stones, really good Mellotron ballad right there, Harlequin. Then you got the quirky Harold the Barrel. It's just fucking masterpiece from top to bottom. One of the defining albums of the progressive rock genre. And one of my favorites. This one here, it got a 92.99%. So pretty much a 93%, which means it's a high-end masterpiece on my scale. Best song, The Musical Box. Worst song, probably Harold the Barrel. I mean, it's funny, but it kind of wears thin after like many listens. And then obviously Return of the Giant Hogweed and Salmacis are just right up there as well. Fantastic album. Can't recommend it enough. Number 3, guys. The one, the only, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Regarded by many as being the best Genesis album. And honestly, I just go back on my channel. I made like an hour and a half long review of this thing. Just really dissecting everything I know about the album, and it's definitely a masterpiece. It's an album that you just get obsessed with over the years. It's not an album that you'll initially love, because it does take so many listens to really absorb and appreciate, but over time, I feel like it's just part of my life at this point. Like, it's just it's inseparable for me. Like, I listen to this album like all the fucking time, and it's just, what's there to say about it? It's the lyrical peak of Peter Gabriel. His lyrics are just incredible. It's the epic double album concept masterwork, and it's just so dark and brooding and weird and quirky, and there's so many twists and turns. It's never boring. So many instrumentals on the album that are just range from being absolutely bizarre, like The Waiting Room, to absolutely beautiful, like Hairless Heart. And you got epics as well. You got The Colony of Slippermen, one of the weirdest, strangest Genesis songs ever, but with one of the catchiest choruses and so many hooks and amazing keyboard solos. Then you got In the Cage, one of their most intense tracks, also clocking in at 8 minutes. The beautiful Carpet Crawlers, the bluesy Chamber of 32 Doors. Oh man, the absolutely deathly Anyway. The Lamia, one of my personal favorite song on the album, but I think it's honestly one of the greatest songs ever written. Like, I tears come to my eyes every time I hear that song. It's just a stone cold masterpiece. I love the story it tells, although it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I still love the imagery and the darkness, and honestly everything about this album. The only reason it's at number 3 and not number 1 is I just simply like the other two just slightly better. I listen to them more often than this album, but they're honestly all equal. Like if someone put this as number 1, I would honestly have no gripe with that whatsoever. It deserves to be number 1. But just for me personally, for personal reasons, I got to put like number 2 and 1 just slightly ahead of this. But that being said, this album got a score of 93.71%, so extremely high on my rating scale. And my favorite track on it, I already mentioned, was the Lamia, but a close second, probably In the Cage or Colony of Slippermen, or what's it called? Fly in a Windshield. That might be my second favorite. I fucking love Fly in a Windshield. That Steve Hackett just totally goes crazy on that song. One of the most atmospheric. But yeah, least favorite song, I don't know. There's a few like here and there, kind of like throwaway, kind of like atmospheric kind of pieces, like Ravine and the first 3 minutes of The Waiting Room. But they're few and far between on the album, so it doesn't really impact the score that much. But yeah, those kind of songs, could have done without them, but they do enhance the atmosphere, so I can't knock it. So yeah, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, epic, sprawling, incredible masterpiece. All right, guys, almost at the final stretch here. Number 2. This one here, it's strange because I objectively consider this to be the best Genesis album of all time. I mean, everything is just flawless. This probably has like the greatest performance by Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, and Tony Banks all in one album, and Steve Hackett as well. Selling England by the Pound from 1973. For me, it's objectively the greatest Genesis album, but for personal reasons, I do prefer my number 1 pick, which I'm sure all of you guys already know what it is by process of elimination, over this album. But just by a very small margin, and just for like literal like nostalgic and personal reasons. But Selling England by the Pound, man, what's there to say about it? I mean, this album here, it's widely regarded to be like one of the best albums, if not the best progressive rock album ever made. It has this incredible atmosphere. The lyrics, it's kind of also like a little bit of a concept album, kind of harkening back to old English times and corruption of British society by marketing and corporations and things like that. I'm not really wording it properly, but check out my review if you want some more info on it. And it's just got it all. I mean, it's got everything that the albums leading up to this point had. It has the atmosphere. It has like the kind of like medieval kind of soundscapes going on here, but it also has a lot of jazz fusion elements that Phil Collins and Steve Hackett were bringing in, and just Tony Banks' keyboard playing definitely excelled on this album. I mean, his piano playing is just incredible. It brings a lot of classical elements into it, and using a lot more synthesizer and different types of keyboards to give it all these different textures and unique sounds. And the songs themselves, I mean, Firth the Fifth, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, The Cinema Show, all like top 5 level Genesis songs. The Cinema Show, that last like 4 or 5 minute stretch right there, probably the best Genesis instrumental section of any Genesis song. Firth the Fifth gives it a good run for its money with Steve Hackett's flawless guitar solo, one of the greatest, most atmospheric guitar solos that prove that you don't have to be flashy or play fast to craft one of the best solos of all time. And then you got the Battle of Epping Forest, the 11-minute epic gang warfare, absolutely crazy, bombastic, lyrical assault, which may be hard to get into at first, but over time, I'm sure you'll all love it. I love the charm of that track. And there's a lot of other good ones, like, obviously you got I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. That was like kind of like the hit single off the album. After the Ordeal, a great instrumental that Tony Banks hates for some reason. And what else am I missing here? Oh yeah, More Fool Me, which is kind of out of place. By far the worst song on the album, but not bad. Just your standard 70s ballad. The best song on this album, it's so hard to say. There's 3 perfect tracks. Firth the Fifth, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, and Cinema Show. They're all pretty much interchangeable in terms of quality, but I just got to go for Firth the Fifth. I mean, that guitar solo is one of the greatest musical experiences I've ever had in my life. Especially seeing it live with Steve Hackett a few years back was just a bucket list moment right there. Anyway, that's Selling England by the Pound. It gets a 94.41%. And, yeah, there's nothing much more to say about it. Moving on to number 1. Alright, guys, the moment we've all been waiting for. Number 1! Foxtrot. It's gotta be Foxtrot, guys. Honestly, it's the best. It's my fucking favorite Genesis album. Again, I already mentioned Selling England by the Pound. I think objectively speaking, if you really nitpick and analyze and, you look at the lyrics, you look at the instrumentation, the complexity, everything, all the factors, that's probably the best Genesis album. I won't argue with that. But for me personally, the album I enjoy going back to the most, the album that I play the most, the album that just makes me feel the best physically and mentally is Foxtrot. And, how can you beat this album? Side 2 is Supper's Ready. By far the greatest Genesis song of all time. And, arguably my favorite song ever. There's a few songs, there's 4 or 5 songs that, at any given point, I'm like, yep, that's my favorite song. And Supper's Ready, out of all of them, has been at that position for the longest. The other ones, I'm not going to get into it now to get off on a tangent, but Close to the Edge by Yes is one of them. Achilles' Last Stand by Led Zeppelin. There's a lot of other ones that give it a run for its money, but Supper's Ready is my favorite song ever. Honestly, what's there to say about it? It's an absolute journey. It's an experience. I'm sure, everything that's been said about it, you guys know already, so I'm not going to go in depth. But then on side 1, side 1 is just so strong as well. You got Watcher of the Skies, okay? On any other album, this will be the main highlight of the album. It's just incredible. Gabriel singing on it, especially the Mellotron intro right there. It's just a flawless song. On any other album, that would stand out as being the greatest. But on an album like Foxtrot, with so many other good songs, it's arguable. And then you got fucking Get 'Em Out by Friday. Again, one of the quirkiest and weirdest Genesis songs. Some people say that the vocals are a little bit hard to get into. I agree. At first, it was a little weird, but over time, I've just appreciated it so much. And the instrumentation on it is just, it doesn't get any better than that. My personal favorite underrated track on the album is Can Utility and the Coastliners. Just, again, one of the greatest Genesis instrumental breakdowns, one of the most atmospheric, one of the most sweeping moments, some of the most intense moments as well. Just that song deserves a lot more love. Definitely a top 10 Genesis song for me. And then you got Timetable, the weakest track on the album, but still pretty enjoyable and with some great hooks and a great chorus. So again, when you have Supper's Ready on side 2, and side 1 being as strong as it is, for me personally, that's my favorite Genesis album. And it probably will be for a very long time to come, but you never know. So that one there got a score of 96.39%. Basically, the only song I didn't give a perfect score to was Timetable and Horizons, but it's just a short instrumental, so that doesn't really count. But yeah, it's almost a perfect album. So that's my list, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and again, Merry Christmas. I just thought I'd shoot out this video before I head out for Christmas dinner. It's been awesome talking to you guys. If you saw my previous version of this video from 2017, you'll notice there's been a few changes. Nothing major, but a few changes. I just thought I'd revamp the video, give it some commentary rather than just text and music clips. Just breathe some more life into it. It seems to be a popular video on my channel compared to the other videos, so I thought I'd give it some justice. But yeah, that's my list. As always, comment your list down below. Fucking get as detailed as you want. Rank that shit. Honestly, do whatever you want, guys. I read every comment. And thank you so much. God bless if you're religious. It's Christmas. I know it's a religious holiday. And if you're just enjoying it for the season, then happy holidays. And yeah, fuck yeah. Genesis. I'm off to listen to some Blood on the Rooftops right now. So, Merry Christmas, guys. Take it easy.